What's up, everybody? Davey D hanging out with you, and we are live from the West Coast, California, San Francisco, the home of what I would probably be safe in saying will be the future World Series champions, the San Francisco Giants, who are actually playing Game 7 as we speak, and has held up our entire studio audience and a couple of our guests because of the massive traffic, but it's all good. We're going to have this conversation as we are on the cusp of the 2012 election, and we are anticipating the big and final debate, presidential debate. So we have an esteemed panel here. And first of all, we want to give major shout out to Biko Baker from the League of Young Voters.
Thanks, Davey.
He has had an incredible tour over the past few months called the IgniteDebate Tour. And so we were out there in Brooklyn to be a part of that, and we convinced Biko to come out here, and we teamed up. So Free Speech, Hard Knock Radio, IgniteDebate, we all are here together collaborating. Next to Biko Baker, we have Eli Jacob Fantauzzi. He's a filmmaker. He has a company called Fist Up TV. He's been all throughout Latin America and Cuba doing documentaries on hip-hop, politics, and culture. And so since this is a foreign policy debate, we definitely want to talk to him about what is happening, especially since he has just returned from Colombia. So this should be very, very interesting. Next up, we have next to us one of the youngest sitting supervisors throughout America. Her name is Jane Kim, and she has an incredible story of how she beat the political machine that would usually keep somebody like you out of office, but you overcame that, and you are setting an example in breaking down doors. So we want to talk to her. And then last but not least is a gentleman who put out a number of books, End of the Jews, as well as Angry Black White Boy, but he really made his name known when he did a children's storybook for adults called Go to F to Sleep. And now he's making a lot of noise with a very provocative commercial with Sam Jackson called Wake the F Up. And so Adam Mansbach is one of our guests as well. How you doing, Adam?
Good, Dave. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Let me start off with you, Biko. What is happening on the road right now? You're just getting back from Tulane. The perception is a lot of young people aren't going to the polls. A lot of young people aren't politically energized. This is not going to be the same way as it was in 2008, but you've been around the country. How are you seeing things now?
Yeah, Dave, just thanks for linking up with us and Open Line Media and Synergize.com, for letting us be in this beautiful space. It's really groovy. It's way not as grassroots as we've been on the tour, and I really appreciate you opening your home up to us. But, there's two things, man. On one side you see the anger that is righteous indignation that you see in the youth community, given that there's such high levels of unemployment and people are graduating college and not getting jobs. But at the same time, when I travel, I see young people who are connected, plugged in. They know the stories. They're following the political narrative. They know the discourse. And they're pretty smart. And actually, I think they're more plugged in than myself or yourself was when we were kids. So I think we got to give them credit.
You were a part of the success story. And when I say success, was the recall election in Milwaukee. Yes, Scott Walker did retain his governorship, but the understory that wasn't reported was record turnout of black youth in Racine and Milwaukee, where you really are situated. Talk about that, because you had more people turn out for that election than you did in '08 for Obama.
Yeah, it was like 73 or 74% turnout rate in the city of Milwaukee, much higher than the rest of the state. And I think we've been on the ground, not just the league, but dozens of organizations have been on the ground grinding since 2000, prior to Bush, Kerry, and then Obama and McCain. But you got passionate young people in a city that's mostly black, mostly young, just fighting for their self-interest. And we talk to them using the internet, using art in a language that's familiar, and it's not hard, and they get it.
Is this president connecting, or is the opposition connecting to him?
I think you have seen the rise of angry black Republicans. I think it's coming. I think people are connecting to the fiscal responsibility narrative of seeing how that subsidies have hurt our community in many ways, just as much as they've helped it. And then I think the right has done a great job of embedding themselves in the culture. They've done a much better job of getting on World Star, Alex Jones, Ron Paul. They're pushing the legalization frame. And then finally, Obama has just lost all his cool. You know, he got into the White House and forgot how to communicate. So he's doing this great stuff, but no one knows about it.
Adam, let me bring this to you. You were inspired to take a very popular book, one of the most highest selling books on Amazon ever, and take that and put it in a political spin. You know, again, using culture, which was a major component for Barack Obama in 2008. Talk about your ad, and maybe if we get a chance, we'll play that very provocative ad, which is not made for prime time. But you and Sam Jackson and a bunch of people came together and really went all out to do something in a way that would really excite people.
Yeah, we certainly did. You know, the idea was just to produce something that would galvanize a somewhat disaffected base and call attention to a lot of the president's accomplishments, which, as Biko rightly points out, he has not been particularly effective in communicating. And also to help to define the Romney campaign, since he himself is constantly shifting his positions, and it's become increasingly difficult for voters to pin him down, which I think, frankly, accounts for a lot of the strides he's made in recent weeks as he tacks vociferously toward the center after a Republican primary campaign in which he defined himself as severely conservative. He's really been shifting considerably as the weeks tick down to the election. So we wanted to do something that would not read to viewers like a regular political ad. Something that was going to be funny, that was going to balance style and substance in a certain kind of way. Sam and I had worked together on the audiobook
Sam
for
Jackson.
Sam Jackson.
So
and
you
I
call
had,
him Sam.
Well, you know. I mean, come on,
Me and
everybody
Sam
in
were just
America
chilling.
calls him Sam, you know. Sam had done the audiobook for Go the F to Sleep, and the organization contacted me, the JCER, Jewish Center for Education and Research, which is a kind of non-traditional super PAC. They're not really about raising tremendous amounts of money. They made, I think, brought in less than $200,000 last year, but they're very good with media. They're very good with using and leveraging the connections they have. So they've worked with Sarah Silverman, Rosie Perez, folks like that, to produce ads that just spread virally and don't really require you know, TV purchases or anything like that to get the message out. They approached me with the idea of doing a takeoff of my book. I said it was cool with me as long as I wrote it. And as the script came together, we realized that Sam was the logical guy to read it, so we kind of rejiggered the campaign around him, and the thing came out on September 27th, and we got about 1.7 million views in the first 24 hours. So it's had some impact, hopefully.
And these are the types of things that go underneath the radar. Let me just ask you one more, and then we'll turn to Ms. Kim. One would think the success of these viral type of campaigns, culture, you know, whether it's music, a certain type of approach towards different avenues in art, would be something that would be more used, more pronounced. And yet, when you look at what is presented to the American public, it's still the same old thing that they've been doing for the past, you know, 40 years, except it's gotten more negative. We don't see that sort of creative approach towards reaching different audiences in a way that makes people go, this is who I'm a part of. And that's what was going on in 08. You don't see that now. What do you think has happened that we have that sort of disconnect?
Well, I mean, I think you can't talk about that without talking about the Citizens United decision, which brought insane amounts of money into the process in an unregulated kind of way. So folks need to understand that many of the political ads they see on television, which are inundating the airwaves, not so much here in California, which is not a swing state, but throughout much of the country, these are being paid for by outside groups which can spend limitless amounts of money to get a message out. So we're being blanketed by these special interest ads, these super PAC ads, and they're beholden to none but themselves. There are supposed to be laws about how much, or how little rather, they can coordinate with the campaigns, but it's clear that a lot of coordination is happening, even though that is technically illegal. So, I mean, we really have to start talking about it with that decision and the aftermath of it.
Well, then that would say to me that what you're doing would be used more because it is cheaper and more effective. If you're talking to 1 million people in 24 hours without spending $20 million, why don't we see more of the Adam Mansbachs and the Sam Jackson collaborations, the Sarah Silvermans and the Rosie Perez type of approaches?
I think that you have to have the right resources intellectually to be doing that stuff. I think the left far outpaces the right in terms of not only star power, but humor and a certain kind of wit that translates to the airwaves. So I think moving forward, this is going to be a strategy that you see more and more, but it's only a few cutting edge groups that are realizing the power of it and realizing how to execute it right now.
Supervisor Kim, I wanted to bring you here because you sit in a unique position for a number of reasons. One, when we talk about demographics that are being courted, we see white working class, we see quote-unquote middle class, we see black people, we see brown people, but we don't see a burgeoning Asian population. And when we're out here in the West Coast, that's a very dominant population for whether they're Filipino, Korean, or what have you. That seems to be almost invisible when you hear the conversations on these debates. The other thing is that you are in San Francisco. And this is a city that quite frequently hosts Barack Obama, but you would not know that because he never talks or reflects anything about the politics or policies here. It's kind of like we already got Frisco locked up or we got California locked up, so we don't have to have a conversation. And Mitt Romney's not going to come out here when there's 1 out of 10 San Franciscans are GOP. And then lastly, you seem to also have been part of, I don't know if you would say that you were part, but there was a wave of younger people who ran for office after '08, and many of them did not always make the goal, but you were one of them, and you did it very handily by beating a machine. So let's start off with this invisibility, geographically and even ethnically, when it comes to this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to speak nationally because when you're here kind of embroiled in local politics, that's all you kind of see. But I remember even 10 years ago when I was working on the 2003, mayoral race for Matt Gonzalez, a lot of progressive folks didn't want to go out to Asian American communities, not because they didn't want to or didn't fit within their values, but they were trying to win a race. And they were always just like, frankly, Asian Americans don't vote. So, I want to go out there, but it's not a good use of our time today. We got to build that over time later.
Is that true?
10 years later? Well, I mean, I think at the time it was true. 10 years later, we are seeing Asian Americans come out to vote in San Francisco. And now all of a sudden, people are talking about what Asian American can they run citywide because they see that as the formula to win in the city. And so it's a complete kind of turnaround from 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I have to say that has been incredibly important is organizing. And I hear this all the time. I've heard this actually from my predecessor, Chris Staley, who held the seat before me. He was also he was the youngest elected to the Board of Supervisor before me. And he said he would always fund organizing before he funded services, if he had to make that choice. And I see that in the Asian American community, there has been really strong institutional organizing over long periods of time, multi-generation. Mm-hmm. I think that's built up the practice of finally voting. And now that Asian Americans are seeing the success, now they are excited to go out to vote. So you'll see a lot of seniors excited to vote because they're actually seeing the difference that they're making.
Well, we're also seeing the political power, and the 2 of the 3 largest cities have Asian mayors. Mm-hmm. Oakland and San Francisco now. But in terms of just the candidates themselves being so overt with their gestures to try and win over supporters from different ethnic groups and demographics, you still don't necessarily see that gesture made to various Asian communities.
Yeah, no, I think nationally we're not seeing it. But, I think it's really interesting. People joke about how Bill Clinton was the first black president. And there's a joke in the Asian American community that Obama was the first Asian American president.
Really?
And that joke exists because even though I think Obama's not out there on a national platform talking about the community, everybody knows he grew up in Hawaii.
That's right.
And you cannot grow up in Hawaii without interfacing with Asian Americans. And Asian Americans get that. They know he grew up with Asian Americans. And there is that sense of connection. I do wish he talked about it more. I get the numbers aren't quite there for him yet to bring it up in a national platform. Immigration is clearly an issue that we want him to be stronger on. But most Asian Americans know that about his history. And they also know that he spent time in Asia. And so there's almost a sense of comfort in the sense they're like, oh, he grew up with us, so he has to know what our community faces.
Is he reflecting something like an issue with immigration? And that was one of the things that came up where, You know, when you go to other parts of the country, they think that immigration is just one demographic, but you know, out here, immigration policy impacts brown as well as Asian. You know,
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's been a point of contention.
Yeah, no, I think that's where I think a lot of folks have been deeply disappointed, is that they hoped that Obama would do more around immigration reform. And frankly, it's something conservatives want as well, because immigrants, for however you want, you know, are perceived by conservatives as cheap labor for private sector folks. And that's why, you know, Bush Jr. was actually supportive of immigration reform. He also never quite went about doing it because it's a political hot button issue. But, you know, Obama has done some things on the DL on immigration. One thing he did immediately was he actually made domestic violence against women a source for gaining refugee status. And that was something that Clinton and Bush did not actually allow. And that's huge for women, to say that that was a source of persecution if your country or your community wasn't going to support you.
Let me bring up the other invisibility, California. You know, 1 out of 8 citizens in the United States is from California or Californian. But again, it's one of those states that gives a lot of money but doesn't have anything reflected in the national politic. You care to speak to that? You know, especially being in San Francisco, the man comes here like once a week, stays right up the street, literally around the block at the Intercontinental, but never really doesn't hold rallies here. You know, doesn't do anything, but he collects that money and then bounces.
Yeah, I mean,
as a supervisor, how do y'all feel?
You know, I love Obama. I really do. There are things that, of course, I want him to do more of, but I get that on a national level that he faces challenges that I don't even completely understand. And what he's facing in D.C. is far different from what I think we get here in very progressive San Francisco. Of course, I want to see our politics reflected more in his policies. And I really hope that we can build. I mean, this 8 years of Obama, what I'm hoping will be 8 years of Obama is just us stepping forward. I don't think we're going to be able to jump as far as we hope for, but I'm really hoping Obama is going to make a lot of those strides so we can continue this work.
Eli, I mentioned earlier you're a filmmaker and you've been throughout Central America, Cuba, other places. Tonight we're talking about foreign policy in the debates. First question from your work, and I should also include the work that you did with Ghana, you know, with the incredible documentary, so maybe you can give people an idea of the documentaries you've done. But let's just start with that first.
Okay, so the first one was called Inventos Hip Hop Cubano, so it's hip hop in Cuba. The second one is called Homegrown Hip Life in Ghana.
Right.
And the one that I'm working on now is in Medellin, Colombia, and it's called Revolución Sin Muertos, a revolution without death. And those are my big independent documentaries, but I've been around the world doing, you know, freelance work and stuff like that.
When you go around, how is our politics perceived? How do people see this president? How do they see the elections?
The last election was really cool. I got to work with a woman named Liba Haber, and we went to India, London, and Mexico actually doing polls because we know it's important what our neighbors and what we don't exist by ourselves, so it's important to see what other people think. And that was for the Discovery Channel, and so Sundance Channel, excuse me. And so it was really cool to see because they do have an investment in who our president becomes. And it was overwhelmingly for Obama and also Hillary at that time. They were still doing that debate. And so it was cool to see their reasons why. And as I travel now in Ghana.
What were they saying?
They were saying that it's amazing to see a woman run for the United States of America and for a black person to be running for the United States. And they were blown away by it. And they were saying, you know, what does that mean? I don't think they really knew what that meant, but they were like, we're in a different time.
Right. When you went to Ghana, what was it like for somebody whose roots are in Kenya or has roots in Kenya? How did they perceive this president?
Well, when Obama went to Ghana, he said, I'm America's president, but I'm Africa's son. And, you know, they went crazy. The Ghanaians love Obama. There are billboards, there are bumper stickers, T-shirts, the African cloth. I mean, they all over. It's more than we see here in the Bay Area. They love Obama. How
about now, as we're coming into the 2012 election? We've had foreign policies that have been very challenging. Libya and Somalia come to mind, you know, in terms of that. How are they perceiving him now, or what's been your sense when you've had the Hip Life tour come here?
Yep, it's been hard, and I think really when they look at Obama as a country, they still love Obama, but when you
Obama
talk
as a
more,
country, you mean as
when Obama, you know, when they look at America and when they look at Obama, but particularly or individually, they have problems, and one of the major problems is like immigration or visa issues. When you have hip life artists that have been doing their work for over a decade and are still getting turned down to be able to come and perform in America.
Really?
And me and BDM Productions, Boogie Down Emo Productions, were trying to do this last year, and they turned down the tour. And these people traveled the world. They've been to America. They've gone home. This is how they eat. This is how they live, and they're getting turned down visas.
What about in Central America, especially with Colombia, because there's so much politics that, you know, impact things here, and how is that being perceived?
In Colombia,
or even Cuba too.
In Colombia particularly, I love to see what their local government is doing, and you know, their mayors. And one of the most amazing projects that I've seen is the participatory budgeting. You know, they take a percentage of their budget and they give it locally, and so the young people are really ignited and want to be involved in the politics. And that's something that I don't see in America. I don't see people going to, you know, 5-hour meetings to talk about how this money is going to be spent in their community. And so the folks that I'm documenting are in those meetings. I'm going to the meeting and filming them, and they're there with the elderly. They're there with these young hip hop kids because they want money for this concert that they're doing called Revolution Without Death. Right. And so everybody's asking, you know, this is good for our community. They're putting their ideas on the table, and they're discussing what would help the community most.
Right. And if you're just watching and you don't have a little chyron, this is Eli Jacob Fantauzzi. This is Biko Baker. This is Supervisor Jan Kim. And this is Adam Mansbach. Let me switch gears just a little bit. And Adam, we were talking about the situation of race. And I think this is something that everybody can hone in on. One of the immediate things that happened, and even before '08, was a visceral reaction to a black man getting ready to first set a serious challenge for the White House and then actually getting in there. And many of the policies that we see that have been put in place seem to be a reaction to that, you know. And I wanted to get your take of how you're seeing race play itself out, especially when you talk about white privilege and all these other things, especially in 2012.
Well, I think that it's important to understand, and it's been unspoken, that race in various and complicated and often nefarious ways underlays and undergirds every challenge that the president has faced. There's a basic resistance on the part of many, many people in this country to the fact that a black man is president. Let's remember that Obama lost the white vote to John McCain. His narrow lead right now is in great part because he has near 100% support in the black community and is leading 2-1 among Latinos and at least 2-1 among Asians. So we're seeing disrespect on a fundamental level of the man again and again. I mean, things that have happened just on a semantic level are unprecedented, right? Joe Wilson yelling, "You lie." Confrontations on the tarmac. You know, people
with Jan Brewer pointing a finger.
Jan Brewer pointing a finger. I mean, this is unthinkable. This is unheard of. And Obama, as he did before he was elected and as he's continued to, must navigate a tightrope. He still, as a sitting president and as a black man, cannot demonstrate a level of aggression or of anger that is going to intimidate potential voters. He, in the first debate, was laconic. That may be part of the reason, right? He cannot look too aggressive. In the second debate, he steps it up and executes, I think, brilliantly, a moment of legitimate, sincere outrage at something that Mitt Romney says, but he still has to calibrate very, very carefully. So,
but how long does one have to do that? And, you know, and do you ever...
Until this election is over and you never have to run again. That's how long.
Okay. If you can speak for all white people in America.
As I'm known to do constantly, yeah.
I mean, is there a point in time, well, the criticism is that maybe he should just be, you know, speak up and keep it moving. I bring this up, and maybe Biko, you can chime in, because in spite of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, there's still a significant portion of people who just ain't going to roll with him. And we saw that play itself out in Milwaukee, where you brought out record numbers of people, black, but then 40% who were members of unions that were being attacked by Governor Scott Walker went and voted against it, really around the issue of race. And it just seems like, okay, no matter what you do, there's just going to be people that hold on to that. When do you just, you know, loosen up your shirt and tie and just call it a day and really play to a larger audience?
Well, you know, Milwaukee is the most segregated state in the country. It's been that city in the country has been that way for a while. And they actually made Scott Walker's opponent, they turned him into Obama. So basically, when you're watching the ads, watching them critically, you can tell that they've pinned Obama on Barrett. And
Tom Barrett, that was the
Tom Barrett, the Democratic candidate. And unfortunately, you know, all across the country is not as progressive as is out here. When I moved out to California, got on UCLA's campus, I was like, oh wow, the world is black, brown, yellow, white, and we all hang together. It's not like that in the Midwest, and a lot of these older communities, white folks are dying off. And what we're seeing is racism. This is actually their strategy. This is not an accident. They're doing this on purpose to spin away, you know, what's less of the white working class to vote for Romney. And in some ways, it's working, but I think in the other ways, it's really turning young white youth off, because they're growing up with the same critical perspective. They're growing up with hip hop. They're growing up and can sort of feel Obama's soul, regardless of the talking points. And it's unfortunate. I wish that we had a more robust, you know, Republican Party, because the debate would be better. And Adam used the word laconic. You know what I'm saying? We've been doing this grassroots. What does that word mean, my brother?
Yeah, Adam with the...
that was a reference to the sleepy state of Obama's performance on that first debate. Okay. But, you know, as long as I'm talking again, Dave, I just wanted to point out real quick, you know, I think a lot of the anger and a lot of the outrage directed at Obama is because on some level the Republican Party and its constituency understands that moving forward they are going to be finding the path harder and harder. On a national level, the demographics that are growing are not ones that benefit them. So, I mean, in some ways, this is the frantic last gasp of a party that does not have a future. If demographics continue, if race continues, and if they continue to hold positions that are hateful to those demographics on immigration, on women's rights, they're not going to be a national party for that much longer. So I think you're seeing a lot of frustration, and that's mirrored by the frustration of a white majority that is not going to be a majority for much longer. So you're seeing a lot of anxiety that's being manifest in the Tea Party and in the policies and in the campaign strategies, and it's real ugly.
Let me say this real quick. Just one thing that they're afraid of is, you know, you called Obama the first Asian president. You know, Secretary Energy Chu, the Secretary of the Energy, Stephen Chu, is there. He's Asian. You got the whole cabinet is a virtual Colors of Benetton ad. And while we may be pushing for more progression, I mean, you know, you ain't gonna just clean up that mess, you know, in 4 years. And I think if I was a Republican Party and saw what was in the White House right now, I would be afraid, because the second term of Barack Obama could mean some real progression in our country.
Anything you want to add to this about the issue of race, Jen?
Yeah, no, and I just want to say I'm very sympathetic to Obama, because when people are critical of my votes for my position, inevitably people will use race or gender when they write to me or when they call me as one of the reasons to kind of hate on me. And this came up when, you know, I'm the only member of the Board of Supervisors that doesn't do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Right.
And the flood of emails and phone calls that our office had to field, you know, primarily focused on how I was a woman and that I was Asian. And that was kind of like, you know, people would use epithets to bring me down because of that. So I completely get how there's a different standard. And even when I talk about white privilege, you know, or if I talk about a lot of these different issues, there's definitely a different standard that people hold. And I'm actually very careful now about what I say, because I get that anxiety exists. When I ran for the seat for the South of Market and the Tenderloin, a lot of folks said to me, why don't you wait for an Asian district to open up? Why don't you wait for the Richmond or the Sunset or Chinatown? And kind of the undertone is that, why do you want one more seat? You have 3 seats already. Why are you going for that 4th seat? You know, why don't you leave that for the other communities? And I thought that that was really interesting. But I definitely feel that anxiety as you see increasing diversity in political leadership.
Eli, oftentimes when we talk about race, it's usually couched in terms of black and white. But if we really look at some of the most overt and most aggressive policies, it hasn't been fear of a black planet, it's been fear of a brown planet. Especially when we look at the SB 1070s, we look at the laws passed in Arizona, and even an attempt to change the Constitution, you know, so that people who are born here from parents who aren't quote unquote citizens would, you know, you wouldn't have the citizenship. Talk about that from that perspective, because that seems to be left out a lot of times when we talk about issues of race.
Fear of a brown planet is coming. I mean, we're all brown, I think. So basically, I see the people in Colombia and Puerto Rico and Cuba. You know, we're a rainbow. So there's dark-skinned folks and there's light-skinned folks with blue eyes. And so there's the whole gamut. And in today's politics, what I see is they see Obama more as a figure. They don't, and the news that they don't get the traditional news. They go on the internet for news. And so a lot of what they see is wake the F up, like my man made. A lot of what they see is the Trayvon Martin, and they are asking me like, yo, how does that happen? What, you know, Oscar Grant, how can he be shot in the back? What, you know, how is that possible? So they're not even talking about these huge politics, but they're getting a lot more of their information from the internet and like what goes viral.
Right. But at the same time, there's also policies. If we talk about fear of a brown planet, there's one thing to have all these quote unquote border laws, but when you look at actual policies of what's going on in Mexico, what's going on in Colombia, what, you know, where you've had regime changes, really, and not just, you know, not necessarily just with Obama, but for a very long time. Is there a look and a hope that maybe the tide would stop with this president in terms of just allowing people who may have left-leaning governments to exist without interference from America, you know?
Man, I feel it's similar to the feeling that we had. We had a lot of hopes going in, and as soon as he got settled and nothing really happened, people just kind of continue, you know, they just said, okay, that's the president of the United States of America. These are the communities that I'm circling in, which is the hip hop community, the young folks. And so they're not really talking about the huge policies. They're talking about what's affecting them in their lives. And so the policies about getting visas to come here or being able to send money home in Cuba or being able to visit Cuba, those are some of the more structural issues. But really they're just talking about the more local politics.
You know, Davey, I want to just on terms of the border, I wish that we had a president that would have an honest conversation about how capitalism and NAFTA are destroying not just the United States, our manufacturing sector, and what's going on around the globe. And I think the struggle is, you know, his hands are tied. You know, we don't have a real conversation about this economy. And I feel like unless we're able to do that in this debate.
Well, why are his hands tied?
I mean, Adam talked about, you know, Citizens United. I mean,
but there's more of us, more young people who you said are seeing things differently. There's 80 million if you just put black and brown together as a population. And why not play to that versus worry about, as Adam said, a group of people that's dying off?
I think, and I see Adam jumping in, what I think is two things. One, the brother is from Hawaii, you know, disrespect, but he's not a hood dude, you know, so he didn't get punched in the face. Maybe he did, I don't know, I'm generalizing. The second thing is I don't think we ran up on his back and pushed him hard enough. I think we went to sleep. They came in with you know, the healthcare Act, Obamacare, and we weren't ready for the Tea Party to come in swinging like that. And I think we sort of went to sleep partially because OFA fell apart after he went into the White House. And so I think, you know, I know personally at the league, we're going to go hard the first 100 days. We're going to go super hard. We're going to push him. I don't care who's in office. We're going to push. And I think if we don't do that, it's gonna be more of the same 4 years.
Adam, is this whole thing around race the distraction from having these legitimate conversations or even critiques of this president? And what I mean by that is, I look at, say, for example, the voter suppression that's going on. You know, Clear Channel with billboards in Ohio. You know, white conservative evangelical PACs literally paying off black churches to do ads on BT. All this, you know, offices getting shot. All these things that make a lot of folks go, I'm just going to circle around and I'm just going to get behind him without necessarily maybe having a critical conversation. What does NAFTA mean? What's your position on it? Let's talk about poverty. What's going to be your positions on that? Because what seems to be most urgent are these attacks, which not only come to him, but also start to impact many of our own communities. There's been a marked increase in police brutality, police killings, deportations, all these different types of things that have made people kind of like, okay, we better get behind this guy, because if we go with the other folks and their Tea Party and xenophobia and all that, that's going to be way, way worse. So I'm not even going to criticize or even have the discussion. Let's just make sure that they don't get in.
Well, I think Biko said something very important that I want to underline and try to elaborate on quickly, which is the notion of the perception that Obama was speaking from and on behalf of the left, the far left, the extreme left, the Berkeley, San Francisco, East Bay left, and that therefore, because that was the media perception that was pushed very hard and created, it made it very hard to pressure him from the left. And in the absence of that pressure, the only pressure was coming from the other side. So on one hand, folks around here were disappointed on so many levels, as if we expected him to be the president of the East Bay, right? As opposed to navigating a national terrain that is far more conservative than many of us can even imagine living where and how we do. But in the absence of that pressure, in the absence of us not only exerting it, but knowing how to exert it in a way that was understandable, visible, digestible to a mainstream media that is framing this conversation, he ends up looking like he's beholden to the left and speaking on behalf of it, and thus the right can pressure him in a way that we cannot. So that has been an issue. That's something we need to really figure out how to approach in what we hope is a second Obama term. So, I mean, that's a big part of it. Another part of it, however, in the larger conversation and what this election is about, is the fact that there are things that a president does not control that you would never know he does not control based on these campaign ads and promises. The president does not control the price of gasoline, right? You would be forgiven for not knowing that based on the promises and the elaborations that both of these guys are making or implying. The depth of the economic hole that Obama was in on day 1 and on day 100 and day 400 and day 1200 is not fully understood, right? Romney and Ryan are making a lot of political hay right now by saying that, you know, Obama is blaming his predecessors. Well, if you talk to economists on either side, they will agree that 4 years is not long enough to dig out of the kind of hole that we've been in. There's a lot that he inherited that he's had to work against, to say nothing. And this is something that Obama cannot say for fear of looking weak or whiny or complaining or having people wonder how this would be different in a second term. He's been dealing with an obstructionist Republican Congress that has blocked him at every chance, that came in with one point on their agenda, and that was to prevent a second Obama term. He came to the table attempting to deal with them, and time after time they rebuffed him. So this is all of this underwrites what he's been able to do and not do.
We've seen other people have obstructions, and we've seen them handle it differently. I mean,
not quite like this.
Well, not quite, but, you know, a perfect example would be Arnold Schwarzenegger, who came in there with, you know, majorities and over super majorities in the legislature. And every time he wanted to push something, he went out and he communicated very directly with his base over and over and over again until the narrative changed and people were, you know, like, why aren't you getting behind this guy? And we don't necessarily see that.
I'm gonna let you, I think you want to jump in on this one.
You should say something first, but I okay. Bring up something else about Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the terrain looks very different for Obama with this GOP constituency in Congress than it does for Schwarzenegger trying to reach across the aisle.
But
to
what
the
about the
Democrats.
first 2 years when he didn't have that?
He passed Obamacare. I mean,
but
at the end of the day, he passed Obamacare. You know me, I'm pushing, but he passed Obamacare. You could say that.
Right, but one might say that the type of conversations and the type of scenario that needed to be set wasn't really put into place. If we needed to have these conversations that really start to engage people in a much more vibrant way, as you said, we didn't have that. You know, yes, he passed that, but he didn't communicate with many, many people in this base. He didn't do the Schwarzenegger thing of going to the bully pulpit directly to you and saying, boom. And if I use Schwarzenegger again as an example, if Schwarzenegger went to Modesto, or he went to these cow towns outside of the big cities, he continued to go to those big, to those cow towns to talk to people and say, I'm trying to raise taxes, I'm trying to cut taxes, this is what's happening. And he had his people do that. But when this guy, for the first 2 years, he didn't do that. He didn't come to those very enclaves that that many people were first introduced to. And there was, like, I don't know what he's doing. And then when it became a majority type of situation, instead of being honest and saying that the people that got replaced were not Tea Party, but blue-collared conservative Democrats, he had his people say it was people like you and young people and progressives that were the reason that there was a sea change, when it was really conservative Democrats that lost every seat and progressives only lost one. So that type of stuff I thought those were missed opportunities.
Supervisor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something quickly about California that's a little bit different. And the one key thing is that you need a 2/3 vote at the state Senate and Assembly to pass budget or raise taxes. And that is something that Schwarzenegger had that Obama doesn't have. 2/3 is amazing. It is a really high threshold. So you can have a small minority of Republicans really holding up Democratic agendas in the state of California. And you see that all the time. I mean, the overturning of Prop 13 is one of the most important things that we can do here in the state of California for all the things that we care about, especially public schools. And Obama didn't have that 2/3 threshold where he could have a minority of Democrats hold up legislation
But
in
they
Congress.
can filibuster.
Yeah, they can filibuster.
And a lot of times we did, Democrats didn't filibuster.
That's true. The one thing I have to agree with you on is that, I wasn't disappointed by Obama. Obama turned out exactly as I expected. Obama did plug himself as a centrist. He never came out as a radical or progressive left president.
I thought he was a radical Muslim.
Why I was excited about Obama was he has that it. Right, he has that ability to inspire, and I was actually hopeful that as president, he would inspire people to organize and get involved and get engaged. And I was really hopeful for OFA. OFA was my hope.
What is OFA for people who don't know?
Obama. I don't even remember anymore.
Organizing for America.
Organizing for America. That's right. Organizing for America, and that's what I was excited about. If he was able to, or if that institution was able to continue that excitement of young people staying organized around Obamacare or immigration reform, etc., I actually think that we could have pushed a lot more through. And that was really hard to sustain, which is why, coming back to what I said before, funding organizing is one of the most important things you can do. And even I, as a progressive supervisor, I'm always telling communities, like, I want to do these things, but you have to show up in numbers. You have to show my other colleagues that there's a lot of folks that support this issue, because my vote alone isn't going to get this legislation passed.
Well, we're not talking about a very key word, as we're coming down to the last 10 minutes, corporations.
That's right.
And corporate influence into politics. And what that really means. One of the things I often talk about, like here in California, it's not the Tea Party we're worried about, and it's not Republicans, it's other Democrats that are doing things, the fee hikes at the UC schools. It's not Tea Party people, it's Democrats that are corporate owned and corporate bought that are like, let's privatize, let's raise the fees, let's do these different types of things. And so the question becomes, how do we deal with that? Because that sort of big money is corrosive no matter what the party. And maybe I'll start with you, because you're holding office. How do you resist, or how do you fight when you're not fighting Tea Party, you're fighting people that's like, I'm a developer, and and we may vote for the same president, but on these other things I'm going to be smashing on you, and I may do just as much social damage, you know, for poor people or certain communities as anybody else would.
And I actually think because of the money that's out there, it is really tough for a lot of progressive electeds because we have to fight messaging in the media. And all it takes, you know, people might say that a lot of what we read in the media is a minority of folks, but that's the voice and story that gets out there, or the narrative of what we're actually trying to do. You know, on a local level, it's really different. And I have to say one thing in San Francisco that I really appreciate is that we have funded organizing. When I went door to door, there are more registered voters in SRO, single room occupancy buildings in the Tenderloin than there were in kind of the high-end luxury condos in South Beach by the ballpark. And it was really amazing. You look at your sheet, there'd be 5 registered voters in these huge condos, and then you go to you know, one of the more affordable single room occupancy hotel buildings, and there would be, you know, 20 registered voters per floor. And that made a huge difference in my election, was that I had a base of folks that I can go to for support. And so, I mean, I think that's one of the most important things. On a state level, I think it's really tough. I really think overturning Prop 13 is key. You're never going to get 2/3 vote to pass raising taxes. And taxes is really raising how much we ask individuals and businesses to invest back into our infrastructure, whether it's our schools, our highways, our parks. But we frankly don't have enough to fund all of these things.
Adam, the money, the corporation, the corporatizing of America. How are you seeing that?
Well, I mean, you know, we spoke earlier for a moment about Citizens United. I think what we're seeing personified in Romney is this notion, which has gained increasing currency and culminated in him, of the business manager as candidate, the business manager, the competent businessman as leader. And that's problematic on a number of levels. Romney is a very extreme example. Obviously, he's a man of tremendous wealth who is afraid to talk about that money with any specificity, as he is afraid to talk about his budget with any specificity. And yet he and Ryan subscribe to this kind of Ayn Randian notion of a safety netless system where it's some kind of meritocracy, where those who are supposed to rise, those who do not rise are not meant to. It's frankly a terrifying right-wing vision of kind of social engineering. And contrast that with a guy like Obama, who's been a community organizer, who has been broke, who has been in debt. I think that fundamentally neither one of them is addressing issues of wealth disparity in a way that is ultimately progressive.
Well, they don't say poverty, they say middle class.
There's a lot of talk about the middle class. Yes, the words poor and poverty are in short, are not around very much. You're absolutely right about that. We're definitely not dealing with things like the cost of education, what the way forward is for this country, how we compete when it's going to soon cost, you know, $250,000 to go to college. And yeah, that is one of the primary ways in which, as we were saying before, the left needs to push Obama, but has been unable to do so, because while you understood that he was a centrist coming in, the impression in many sectors of the country was that he was this extreme leftist who couldn't possibly be pushed farther to the left. And so there was a missed opportunity there.
How are you seeing this, Eli? The corporatization, because it dictates not only the politics here, but corporations is what's really fueling foreign policy. You know, it's like, we want that oil. That's big oil. That's not just some politicians. We want that land. We want those seeds, you know, Monsanto. All that stuff is big corporate interests into quote-unquote third world countries or neighbors to the south and our neighbors overseas. How are you seeing that, you know, and the influence that it's having or not having?
I see the influence that it's having locally the same as that it's having internationally, where the people are kind of drawing back from the government and saying, let's do our home garden. Let's do sustainable activities and ways of living right here in our hometowns. And so what we see in Colombia is something similar with, again, in the group of friends that I'm rolling with, is they actually are going to live on a farm and doing workshops, bringing the kids to the farm. And the guy's album is all about our connection with the earth. And so that's kind of what you see. And they put up they're still against Monsanto's and all those bigger policies, but really they're focusing their energy locally.
Right, but shouldn't we have a strategy to get rid of that corporate tyranny?
We should, and I don't think that that's really happening locally, and I don't think that is happening internationally. Again, within my circle, I'm not saying that it's not happening, but that's not where we're focusing. That's not even where I'm focusing right now.
Right.
Where when I was in college, it wasn't that. It was much of the bigger picture. Let's go for the big dogs. Right now, it's about our communities.
Okay. As we get ready to wrap up tonight, what do you want him to say, or what do you think he should say? As we watch the debate, especially on the foreign policy tip, Biko?
I mean, I think there hasn't been a knowledge of climate change anywhere, and I think that's absolutely imperative. The rest of the world is looking at us like we're crazy because we don't talk about climate change. And real quickly, I think we stopped this corporatization by providing alternatives. We've killed old media through the use of the internet, and I think young people all across this country really believe in themselves, man. And I think we can starve the beast if we start having these conversations. And I believe in us, man. I really do believe that's the only way we're going to stop these folks, because they will drive it into the ground and try to terraform Mars or go to some other planet.
Right. Adam, what do you think they should be talking about tonight?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting to have a debate that's entirely devoted to foreign policy. It's hard to imagine how Mitt Romney is going to get 45 minutes of material out of this situation. You know, he saved the Olympics, as we all know very well, with the help of a $400 million bailout, but that was in Salt Lake City. He went on tour and, talked out his ass in London, managed to alienate them. He's going to try to, quote unquote, talk about daylight between the U.S. and Israel. But the guy really doesn't have much foreign policy experience to speak of. And one of the things that Obama
but he has corporate policy, and corporate policy is foreign policy now.
Yes, but he can't really talk about his experience in outsourcing jobs to China. You know, that's not what anybody wants to hear from him. I think that Obama's got to win big tonight. It's been a rough couple of weeks for him ever since he flubbed that first debate, and this should be ground on which he's very comfortable. Coming in, he had to answer questions about that 3 a.m. phone call. He's turned foreign policy in many ways from a democratic weakness into a stronghold because of the ways in which he's pursued al-Qaeda, the stances he's taken in, various countries as the Arab Spring was unfolding. Libya is going to be in play in a big way. Obama turned that from a liability into a strength in the last debate. Romney overstepped. He got fact-checked. He looked like a clown. He might be a little bit hesitant.
What about the drone policy?
Do
you think that will be a liability?
That's, to me, a big question. Will that even come up? One of the main criticisms Obama's had from the left is about these unmanned drone strikes. There's been strikingly little conversation about what that would look like under a Romney administration. Probably Pakistan would be turned into one big parking lot. So on one hand, we're critical of Obama for these strikes, which some folks feel are unethical and that we don't know enough about. On the other hand, if we get into that discussion, it's going to be really interesting to see how Romney is going to try to beat his chest and out alpha male Obama and come with an outsized level of aggression. What kind of drone strikes,
Well, we're talking about drones as Oakland is getting ready to get them, or Alameda County with the sheriff, which is, crazy frightening because there's this big drone lobby. And now we're seeing these not only being domesticated, but we also know by 2015, private corporations, coming back to that foreign policy tip, will get to own drones. And that, to me, is one of the frightening things, and how that, like you said, climate change is not being talked about. We're not talking about the fact that the Koch brothers and Donald Trump and every major corporation can own drones by 2015. And this is already a criticism that's being leveled at the left. And as you said, we haven't heard what they would do with it on the right. So it's something that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to. It might not show up, but that might be a thing to really highlight. Be like, wow, nobody said anything about drones either. What does that mean at the end of the day? Jane, how are you seeing this, Supervisor? What
One of the-
foreign policy?
Well, one of the things that I hope he brings up, as someone that's really locally focused, is him talking about what the cost of the previous administration's foreign policies has been locally. And so what that's actually meant in real dollars, how many school teachers were laid off, how many schools were closed, how many, you know, on a very real level, like people have to understand how what we do in Iraq and in Libya and all of those things have a cost in your community. And he started to kind of peel back at that in the second debate, which I actually really appreciate, and I hope he really drives that home today, because I think that's what people need to understand is how it connects to their daily life.
Right. You know, we're at the Pacific Rim, you know, and a lot of trade, a lot of our ports do big business, and that has become an issue. The outsourcing of jobs, China being a money manipulator, all these different types of things. Do you think that would have any sort of impact, any of those conversations locally?
I mean, you hear it already right now. I mean, even when I'm out, the number one issue for folks is jobs. And that's in every community. People want to have jobs. They want a livelihood. You know, Obama addressed that in the second debate. He talked about how we need to work towards kind of we need to train folks for a different type of economy. But frankly, the investment's not there. And we're still teaching kids the same way we taught them in the 1960s, right? So unless there's a real investment in changing public education, we're not training our young people for those jobs that Obama's talking about. And he needs to be able to articulate that.
Well, there you have it. I want to thank our guests for this roundup as we get ready to watch the debate. Biko Baker from the League of Young Voters from Milwaukee. Eli Jacob Fantauzzi from fistuptv.com. Big shout out to you. Thank you for being here. Supervisor Jan Kim here in San Francisco, the city and county of San Francisco. And we need to find out what the Giants score is, if they're winning right now, because if that is the case, are they winning? 2-0. Oh, well, there you go. If they win, when this debate is over, there won't be any way for us to leave the studios, because if it's anything like it was last time, the streets were all packed where we're at. We're near the ballpark, not too far from it. So, Adam Mansbach, thank you, author of a number of books, including the award-winning Go to F to Sleep, and you got your new book, Rage, right? And what's the other one? Rage and
Rage is Back, because my
Rage
new
is Back,
novel
right.
comes out in January.
That's the one I got,
That's
right?
the one
That
you got.
I need to finish reading.
Yes, you do.
And I want to thank my class that's hanging out with us, and we'll take a break and then we'll be back.